All right, welcome everyone to today's Explainer. Today, I'm going to be stepping into the shoes of your attending neurologist. We're going to do a rapid-fire, high-yield clinical review of the human neural system. So whether you're a biology student cramming for that next big exam, or just someone who's super fascinated by how our bodies actually work, we're going to break down the complex machinery that makes you, well, you. So here's our game plan for today's rounds. We'll be hitting the body's control systems, neurons and action potentials, synaptic transmission, mapping the neural network, brain anatomy and function, and then we'll wrap up with some clinical case diagnostics. We're taking a real bottom-up approach here, starting with the microscopic hardware and scaling all the way up to the brain. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the body's control systems. To maintain homeostasis, that perfect internal balance despite a constantly changing outside world, our organs absolutely have to communicate. And they basically rely on two main systems to get this done. Comparing them is a really great way to understand their specific roles. Think of the endocrine system as the body's global chemical email blast. It uses hormones to send these broad, slower-acting messages that integrate throughout the whole body. The neural system, on the other hand, that's a direct, lightning-fast, point-to-point phone call. It uses this highly organized network of connections to deliver immediate rapid-fire coordination. Like, when you start running, your neural system instantly tells your heart to beat faster and your lungs to breathe deeper. Moving right along to Section 2, neurons and action potentials. Let's look at the actual wiring of those rapid-fire phone lines. What we're looking at here perfectly illustrates the structural and functional unit of this entire system, the neuron. A neuron is just beautifully designed for one-way communication. It grabs incoming signals through these short branch-like structures called dendrites. That signal is then processed in the main cell body, and if it's strong enough, boom, it gets fired down the long cable-like axon. Now, a lot of these axons are wrapped up in a protective myelin sheath, which is formed by Schwann cells. This sheath actually speeds up the transmission of the signal, basically allowing it to hop incredibly fast down the line. Now, what's really fascinating is exactly how that signal travels. Because it's not like electricity in a standard copper wire. It's actually an electrochemical wave known as an action potential. When a neuron is just resting, it maintains this resting potential using a sodium-potassium pump. This pump is actively shoving 3 sodium ions out of the cell for every 2 potassium ions it brings in. This creates a highly polarized state. It's literally like a stretched rubber band just waiting to snap. And when a stimulus hits, well, that rubber band snaps. Sodium channels fly open. Sodium rushes into the cell, and the electrical charge rapidly flips. That is depolarization, the actual firing of the nerve impulse. Right after that, potassium rushes out to reset the charge, which we call repolarization, getting the neuron totally ready to fire all over again. Okay, Section 3, synaptic transmission. So the electrical signal has traveled the length of the axon, but how does it jump to the next cell to keep going? Well, it jumps across a junction called a synapse. And there are basically 2 ways to cross this gap. Electrical synapses allow the current to just flow directly from one neuron to the next. They are incredibly fast, but actually pretty rare in the human body. Most of our nervous system relies on chemical synapses. In this setup, the 2 neurons don't actually touch. They're separated by a tiny, fluid-filled gap called the synaptic cleft. So when the electrical action potential reaches the very end of the first neuron, it forces these little vesicles to dump chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, right into the gap. These chemicals float on over, bind to specific receptors on the second neuron, and trigger a brand new electrical impulse. It's this beautiful, seamless translation from electrical to chemical and then right back to electrical. Section 4, mapping the neural network. Now that we've got a handle on the cellular hardware, let's step back and map out how these millions of nerves are actually organized in the body. The architecture of our neural network is split into 2 main divisions. First up, we've got the central neural system, or the CNS. This consists entirely of your brain and your spinal cord. This is it, the ultimate command and control center, the site of all major information processing. Everything else, all those branching nerves stretching out into your fingers, your toes, your internal organs, that makes up the peripheral neural system, or the PNS. Basically, the PNS is this vast communication network linking the outside world and your body tissues back to that central hub. And within that peripheral system, we essentially have this super busy 2-way street of nerve fibers. Afferent fibers are the inbound lanes. They're transmitting sensory data from your tissues and organs inward to the central neural system. So if you accidentally touch a hot stove, afferent fibers are what carry that sudden pain signal straight to your brain.
Efferent fibers, meanwhile, are the outbound lanes. They carry motor commands and regulatory impulses from the central neural system outward to the tissues. They're the ones telling your arm muscles to instantly pull your hand away from that stove.
All right, let's move to the main event. Section 5, Brain Anatomy and Function. Let's focus entirely on that ultimate command center sitting at the very top of the central neural system.
Looking at a cross-section of the human brain, you'll see it's well protected by the skull and these three really tough layers of tissue called the cranial meninges. Anatomically speaking, we divide this unbelievably complex organ into three major territories: the forebrain at the top and front, the midbrain tucked deep inside, and the hindbrain situated right down at the lower back, near the spinal cord.
Now, a great way to memorize this for your exams, or just to build a solid mental map, is to group the functions by location. Basically, as you move from the bottom of the brain to the top, the functions get more complex. The hindbrain handles basic life support reflexes and physical balance. The midbrain acts as this crucial sensory integration and relay point. And that massive forebrain up top, that handles higher processing, complex thought, and the ultimate regulation of homeostasis.
Let's break down that forebrain because it really is doing the heavy lifting. That huge folded outer layer is the cerebrum, which is split into two hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum. This right here is where your memory, communication, and complex motor functions live. Buried a bit deeper is the thalamus, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. But honestly, perhaps the most vital structure for daily survival is the tiny hypothalamus sitting right below it. The hypothalamus is your body's ultimate thermostat. It contains the centers that control your body temperature, your urge to eat, and your urge to drink. It's the master homeostatic controller.
Traveling back down to the hindbrain, we find three critical structures. First, the pons, which consists of tracts that interconnect different brain regions. Then, the cerebellum, which has this highly convoluted surface that provides immense space for neurons. It's entirely dedicated to coordinating your body's balance and movement. But the really crucial one to note here is the medulla. The medulla connects directly to the spinal cord, and it controls absolutely vital involuntary functions. We're talking respiration rate, cardiovascular reflexes, even gastric secretions. You never have to think about breathing or making your heart beat, all because your medulla is running those life-saving programs on autopilot 24/7. All right, students, it's time for Section 6, Clinical Case Diagnostics. As medical professionals, we don't just memorize anatomy, right? We have to interpret physical signs of neural dysfunction to figure out exactly where damage has occurred. So let's apply this physiological anatomy to a few hypothetical patients. Here's your first case. A patient presents in the ER and they've totally lost the ability to regulate their body temperature. They're wildly fluctuating between fever and hypothermia. On top of that, they report a complete loss of the urge to eat or drink, even when they are biologically starving or dehydrated. So, based on these very specific physical signs of homeostatic failure, which neural structure is malfunctioning? If you guessed the hypothalamus, you hit the nail on the head. The diagnosis here is a localized lesion or injury in the hypothalamus. This case perfectly proves why this relatively tiny forebrain region is absolutely critical. Without it, the body simply loses its fundamental survival drives and the ability to maintain internal temperature homeostasis. Let's move to our second case. A patient suffers a traumatic head injury and suddenly loses the automatic physiological drive to breathe. They aren't physically paralyzed, but their body just stops trying to take a breath on its own, and their cardiovascular reflexes become dangerously unstable. Where is the lesion? This specific localized neural failure points straight to the medulla in the hindbrain, and this highlights exactly why trauma or swelling in the brainstem is so immediately life-threatening. If the medulla gets compressed or damaged, the automatic signals telling the lungs to breathe and the heart to regulate its beating are literally just cut off. So, to wrap up our clinical rounds today, I want you to keep this diagnostic mnemonic in your mental map when you're observing patient symptoms. Forebrain failures typically manifest as cognitive changes, memory loss, or broad hormonal and homeostatic imbalances. Hindbrain failures, on the other hand, typically manifest as losses of physical balance, or most dangerously, the loss of those involuntary vital reflexes. I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to test how well you've integrated today's study guide. If a patient was exposed to a specific neurotoxin that completely paralyzed the microscopic sodium-potassium pumps on their neural membranes, what would happen? Well, that resting potential, it would disappear.
Neurons could no longer fire action potentials, and without those microscopic electrical signals, the entire macroneural network, from the chemical synapses all the way up to the mighty cerebrum and the vital medulla, would instantly collapse, leading to immediate systemic failure. It all starts and ends right there at the cellular level. Thank you so much for joining me on Rounds today. Keep studying hard, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.